There's a special kind of invisibility that hurts more than being looked at with disgust. It's the invisibility of being constantly looked past, as if you're a piece of furniture in a room full of paintings. Mara knew that invisibility well. She'd lived with it her whole life, not because she was unremarkable, but because the world had decided she wasn't worth remarking on. Plain Mara. Safe Mara. The friend who always listened. Never the one worth pursuing. Until the day she stood in an emerald green bridesmaid dress that didn't quite fit, holding a bouquet of white roses, and locked eyes with a man who saw something everyone else had missed. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you feel it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. The fitting room smelled of lavender sachets and desperation. Mara stood on the small platform in front of the 3-panel mirror, trying not to look at her reflection, while the seamstress muttered in frustration, pulling at the fabric that refused to cooperate with Mara's body. The emerald green satin clung in all the wrong places and gaped in others, as if the dress itself was rejecting her. "You need to lose about 10 pounds before the wedding," her cousin Vanessa said from the velvet chair behind her, scrolling through her phone without looking up. The dress would fit better. Mara felt her cheeks burn but said nothing. She'd learned early that responding only made things worse. Vanessa was the bride, and Vanessa had always been the beautiful one, the noticed one, the one who commanded attention simply by existing. Mara was the cousin who faded into wallpaper, useful for errands and emotional labor, but never quite pretty enough to stand beside Vanessa without making her shine brighter by comparison. "I'll do what I can," the seamstress said diplomatically, her mouth full of pins. "But the color, it's very bold. It requires a certain, well, presence to carry it off." Mara understood. She lacked presence. She always had. At 28, she'd made peace with it, or so she told herself. She had a quiet life as a children's librarian, a small apartment filled with books, a cat named Dickens. She didn't need to be beautiful. She didn't need to be noticed. Except some part of her, a part she tried to suffocate with practicality, still wanted it. Still wanted someone to look at her and see something worth treasuring. The wedding was in 3 weeks. Vanessa was marrying Cole Ashford, heir to the Ashford hotel empire, in what was being called the social event of the season. 200 guests, a ceremony at the historic Belmont estate, a reception that cost more than Mara made in 2 years. Vanessa had been planning it since she was 12, long before she'd even met Cole. She'd simply been waiting for the right groom to slot into her perfect vision. Cole seemed nice enough, if a bit bland. Handsome in that generic catalog model way. Polite, appropriate. He looked at Vanessa the way someone might admire a painting they'd purchased, with pride of ownership rather than genuine wonder. But Vanessa didn't seem to mind. She had what she wanted. The ring, the status, the validation that she was special enough to be chosen by someone who mattered. "Can you at least try to smile at the reception?" Vanessa said, as Mara changed back into her jeans and sweater behind the curtain. "You always look so serious in photos. It's depressing." "I'll smile," Mara promised, pulling her worn sweater over her head. Her real smile, the one that transformed her face, was something she saved for children at story time, for moments when no one was evaluating her worth. "Good, because Cole's brother will be there, and he's very particular about aesthetics." Mara frowned. "I didn't know Cole had a brother." Vanessa finally looked up from her phone, her expression sharpening with interest. "Oh, you don't know about Julian. He's the older brother. He runs the actual business while Cole plays at being vice president of development." "Julian is," Vanessa paused, searching for the right word. "Intense. Gorgeous, obviously, but difficult. He turned down being best man because he said weddings are performative displays of temporary emotion. Can you imagine? Mara could imagine, actually. It sounded refreshingly honest. Is he coming to the wedding? Of course he's coming, Cole begged him. Apparently, Julian never comes to anything. But he agreed to this, probably to make sure Cole isn't making a mistake. Vanessa laughed, but there was an edge to it. As if I'm not enough of a prize. Mara didn't respond. She'd learned that Vanessa's questions were rarely actual questions. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of bridesmaid duties. Mara addressed invitations in her careful handwriting, picked up the wedding favors, attended a disastrous bachelorette party, where she was the designated driver and emotional support, while Vanessa's real friends got drunk and talked about people Mara didn't know. She smiled through it all. The invisible cousin, the dependable one, the one who could be counted on to do what was needed without complaint or expectation of recognition. The dress still didn't fit right, even after the alterations. The emerald green made her look sallow, washed out. But Vanessa had chosen it specifically because it would make her own ivory gown look even more radiant by contrast. Mara understood her role. She was the frame, not the picture. The morning of the wedding, Mara woke at 5 to help Vanessa get ready. The bridal suite at the Belmont estate was larger than Mara's entire apartment, all cream and gold and excessive floral arrangements. Vanessa held court like a queen, surrounded by her bridesmaids, the pretty ones, girls who'd been cheerleaders and prom queens, who knew how to pose for photos and flirt effortlessly. Mara stayed at the edges, making sure everyone had champagne, that the hairstylist stayed on schedule, that Vanessa's mother didn't have a breakdown over the centerpieces. "Can you fix my bustle?" one of the bridesmaids asked Mara, not even looking at her face. Mara knelt on the floor, working the tiny buttons with patient fingers, while the bridesmaid continued her conversation above her head, as if Mara didn't exist. She'd become very good at being invisible. Sometimes she wondered if she'd practiced it so much she'd actually disappeared. The ceremony was beautiful in that impersonal, magazine-perfect way. Mara stood with the other bridesmaids, holding her bouquet of white roses that had started to wilt in the heat, watching Vanessa glide down the aisle like she'd been born for this moment. And maybe she had been. Some people were made to be looked at, admired, celebrated. Others were made to do the looking, the admiring, the celebrating from the shadows. Mara had accepted which category she belonged to, but then, during the exchange of vows, she felt it. The weight of someone's gaze. Not the casual glance of a guest checking out the bridesmaids, but a focused, sustained attention that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She tried to ignore it, keeping her eyes on Vanessa and Cole, on the officiant reading from his leather-bound book. But the feeling persisted, insistent, almost physical in its intensity. Finally, unable to stop herself, she let her eyes drift to the first row of seats on the groom's side, and found him watching her. He was tall, easily 6'2", with dark hair that was slightly too long, curling at his collar in a way that suggested he didn't particularly care about conventional grooming. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes so dark they looked black from a distance. He wore a charcoal gray suit that had clearly been tailored specifically for his body, and he sat with a stillness that made everyone around him seem frantic by comparison. Julian Ashford. It had to be. He looked nothing like his brother. Where Cole was soft and approachable, Julian was carved from stone, all edges and intensity, and he was staring directly at Mara with an expression she couldn't read. Not desire, not curiosity, but something else. Recognition, maybe, as if he'd found something he'd been searching for. Mara looked away quickly, her heart hammering. She must have imagined it. Men like that didn't look at women like her. They looked through her, past her, around her. She was furniture, remember? Wallpaper. But when she glanced back, unable to help herself, he was still watching. His gaze never wavered, not even when Cole kissed Vanessa, and the guests erupted in applause. Mara felt exposed, vulnerable, seen in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. What did he see when he looked at her? What could possibly hold his attention when there were 6 other bridesmaids, all of them conventionally beautiful? All of them available. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom, all crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. Mara's assigned seat at the head table put her between Vanessa's childhood friend, who spent the entire dinner talking to the groomsmen on her other side, and an empty chair that belonged to one of Cole's college friends, who'd gotten too drunk during cocktail hour and had been escorted out. So she ate her overcooked chicken alone, watching the party swirl around her, feeling the familiar ache of loneliness that came from being surrounded by people and still feeling completely isolated. "You look miserable." The voice came from beside her, low and rough, like whiskey over gravel. Mara turned and found Julian Ashford standing next to the empty chair, looking down at her with those unsettling dark eyes. "May I?" Without waiting for an answer, he sat down, folding his tall frame into the delicate ballroom chair with surprising grace. Mara's mouth went dry. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. There was something almost predatory about him, the way he occupied space, the intensity of his focus. "I'm not miserable," she managed to say. "Just observing." He smiled. Barely. Just a slight curve of his mouth. That's a polite way of saying you'd rather be anywhere else. She didn't know how to respond to that. Most people didn't notice what she was feeling. They certainly didn't call her on it. Julian leaned back in his chair, studying her with unnerving directness. "You're the cousin." "Mara. Vanessa's told me absolutely nothing about you, which is unusual. She generally catalogs everyone's worth in relation to her own." Mara blinked, shocked by the casual cruelty of the observation, even more shocked that it was accurate. "You don't like your brother's bride. It wasn't a question." "I don't dislike her," Julian said. "I just see her very clearly, and I'm not convinced she sees my brother at all. But that's his choice to make, not mine." He shifted his attention fully to Mara, and she felt the weight of it like a physical touch. "You, however, I can't figure out." "What do you mean?" "You're intelligent. I can see it in the way you watch people, the way you listen. You notice things others miss. You have beautiful hands, delicate, careful, the hands of someone who creates or repairs things. Your dress doesn't fit, which means you didn't choose it, which means you're here out of obligation, not desire. And you're miserable, but you're too kind to let it show." Mara felt heat rising in her cheeks. No one had ever looked at her so closely. No one had ever catalogued her features like she was something worth studying. "I work at a library," she said, unsure why she was offering him this information. "Children's section." His eyes lit up with genuine interest. That explains the patience. And the sadness. "What sadness?" "You spend your days caring for other people's children, telling them stories, helping them discover magic. But at the end of the day, you go home alone to a quiet apartment, and you wonder if anyone will ever see you as worth choosing." Mara's breath caught. How could he possibly know that? How could he see straight through her carefully constructed armor to the raw, aching want underneath? "That's presumptuous," she whispered. But true. She should have been angry, should have told him he had no right to make assumptions about her life. But she couldn't, because he was right. Devastatingly, precisely right. "Why are you talking to me?" she asked instead. Julian was quiet for a moment, his gaze traveling over her face, as if memorizing it. Because when I walked into that chapel this morning, expecting to endure 2 hours of performative nonsense, I saw you standing there in that terrible dress, and something shifted. You were the only person in the entire room who looked real. Everyone else was playing a part, but you were just there, present, honest, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about what that means. Mara's heart was racing now. This couldn't be happening. Men like Julian Ashford didn't notice women like her, didn't seek them out, didn't say things that sounded like the beginning of something impossible. I should go, she said, starting to stand. The bride might need something. His hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. Stay. Please. There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that didn't match his confident exterior. Mara hesitated, suspended between the safe choice and the terrifying one. Then slowly, she sat back down. Julian released her wrist, but didn't move away. Have dinner with me. Tomorrow. Somewhere quiet where we can actually talk. I can't, Mara said automatically. Why not? Because you don't date women like me. You date models and heiresses and women who belong in places like this. Julian's jaw tightened. Don't tell me what I do. You don't know me. Exactly, Mara said. I don't know you. And you don't know me. This is, what? Curiosity? Novelty? The challenge of pursuing someone who doesn't immediately fall at your feet? Julian leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. You think you have me figured out, the bored rich man looking for entertainment. But you're wrong. I've spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who want something from me. Money, connections, status, the validation of being chosen by someone who matters. I can spot insincerity from a mile away. I've built an empire on reading people, on understanding what they're not saying. And when I look at you, I see someone who doesn't want anything from me at all. Someone who would be perfectly content if I walked away right now and never spoke to her again. Do you know how rare that is? Mara's throat felt tight. That's because I don't expect anything from you. I learned a long time ago not to expect things from people. It's easier that way. Easier, Julian repeated softly. But not better. She looked away, unable to hold his gaze anymore. The reception continued around them, music and laughter, and the clink of champagne glasses. But it all felt distant, muffled, as if they existed in a separate reality. What do you want from me? She finally asked. Honestly. I want to know what makes you smile. Not the polite smile you give to strangers, but the real one. I want to know what books you read to those children, and which ones make you cry when no one's watching. I want to understand how someone so clearly intelligent and perceptive convinced herself she's invisible. He paused, running a hand through his dark hair. And selfishly, I want to be near someone who doesn't perform for me. Someone who's just herself. Mara felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept carefully sealed for years. The part of her that still believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that maybe she was worth choosing, worth seeing, worth wanting. One dinner, Julian said. No expectations, no obligations. Just two people having a conversation. If you hate every minute of it, I'll never bother you again. But if you don't, if there's even a chance that this, whatever this is, might be something worth exploring, then give it that chance. Give us that chance. The logical part of her brain was screaming warnings. He was too intense, too perceptive, too dangerous to her carefully constructed defenses. One dinner would lead to another, and eventually he would see all the ways she wasn't enough, all the reasons why she'd learned to be invisible. and the rejection would hurt so much more, coming from someone who'd made her feel visible first. But there was another part of her, smaller but insistent, that whispered, what if? What if he meant what he said? What if she could be enough, just as she was? What if invisibility was a choice she'd made out of fear, not a truth about her worth? Where? She heard herself ask. Tomorrow. 7 o'clock. There's a small Italian restaurant in the old quarter, Marcello's. It's quiet, intimate. No one will bother us there. I'll text you the address. I didn't give you my number. Julian smiled. A real smile this time that transformed his entire face. I'm very resourceful when I want something. The wedding ended in a blur of sparklers and rice. Vanessa and Cole driving away in a vintage Rolls-Royce toward their honeymoon in the Maldives. The bridesmaids scattered, heading to the after-party at some exclusive club Mara hadn't been invited to. She found herself standing alone in the parking lot, still in her terrible emerald dress, holding her uncomfortable heels in one hand, when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text with an address and a single line. I'll be the one who can't stop looking at you. Mara drove home in a daze, her mind replaying every moment of their conversation, every word, every look. In her small apartment, Dickens greeted her with annoyed meows about his delayed dinner. She fed him, changed into her softest, pajamas, made tea she didn't drink. She should cancel. She should text him back and say she'd made a mistake, that this was a bad idea, that she wasn't interested. Instead, she found herself standing in front of her closet at 6:30 the next evening, staring at her limited wardrobe with growing panic. Everything she owned was practical, sensible, designed to help her disappear. Cardigans and plain blouses, comfortable pants, nothing that said she was a woman worth a second glance. Finally, she pulled out a simple navy dress she'd bought on impulse 2 years ago and never worn. It had a fitted waist and fell just above her knees, modest but feminine. She paired it with low heels, applied minimal makeup, left her hair down in soft waves. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not because she looked dramatically different, but because for once, she wasn't trying to disappear. Marcello's was exactly as Julian had described. A small family restaurant tucked between a bookshop and an antique store, the kind of place that had been there for generations, serving the same recipes, maintained by the same loving hands. Warm light spilled from the windows. She could hear Italian music playing softly inside. Mara stood outside for a full minute, gathering courage. She could still leave. She could text an excuse, go home, return to her safe, invisible life. But then the door opened, and Julian was there, looking somehow both perfectly put together and slightly disheveled in dark jeans and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His face, when he saw her, there was no mistaking the expression. Wonder. Pure, unguarded wonder. You came, he said softly. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Mara admitted. He held out his hand. I'm glad you did. She took it, his palm warm and rough against hers, and let him lead her inside. The restaurant was small, intimate, with maybe 10 tables covered in red and white checkered cloths. The smell of garlic and fresh bread and tomato sauce hung in the air like a promise. An older Italian man approached, his face breaking into a huge smile when he saw Julian. Giuliano. He pulled Julian into a tight hug, speaking rapid Italian that Mara couldn't follow. When he released him, his sharp eyes turned to Mara with obvious curiosity and approval. And who is this beautiful lady you bring to my restaurant? This is Mara, Julian said, and there was something in the way he said her name, like it meant something. Mara, this is Marcello. He's been feeding me since I was 12 years old and threatening to disown my family if we don't eat enough. Marcello laughed, a big, warm sound. This one, He was so skinny when his mama first brought him, all bones and sad eyes. Now look at him, handsome, successful, but still sad eyes. Until tonight. Tonight, the eyes are different. He looked at Mara with knowing warmth. You must be special, Kara. This one never brings anyone here. This is his secret place. Marcello, Julian said, but there was affection in his tone, not annoyance. She doesn't need to know all my secrets on the first date. First date? Marcello clapped his hands together. Then I will make you something special. You sit, you talk, you fall in love. Let Marcello handle the rest. They were led to a corner table, partially hidden by a painted screen depicting a Tuscan landscape. Candlelight flickered between them. The atmosphere was so romantic it felt almost cliché, except nothing about this felt cliché. It felt terrifyingly real. I should apologize, Julian said once they were seated. Marcello is enthusiastic. He's been trying to set me up for years. He's lovely, Mara said honestly. He cares about you. More than my actual family does, Julian admitted. My mother brought me here when I was 12, right after my father died. I was angry, lost, didn't know how to process grief. Marcello taught me how to make pasta from scratch. Said mourning is better when your hands are busy creating something. I've been coming here ever since whenever I need to remember what matters. And what matters? Julian looked at her across the candlelight. Authenticity. Connection. Building something real instead of just accumulating things. My father built an empire, but died alone because he never let anyone actually know him. I promised myself I wouldn't make the same mistake. Marcello brought them wine without asking, a rich Barolo that tasted like cherries and earth. He brought bread still warm from the oven, olive oil infused with herbs, plates of antipasto that he described with the passion of an artist discussing his masterpieces. Between courses, Julian asked questions. Not the superficial getting-to-know-you questions people asked on first dates, but real questions that required real answers. What's your favorite book to read to the children? Why do you think stories matter? When did you stop believing you deserved to be seen? That last question caught Mara off guard. She'd been taking a sip of wine and nearly choked. Julian waited, patient, until she could speak. I was 11, she finally said. There was this boy I liked. I wrote him a note telling him I thought he was nice. He showed it to his friends, and they all laughed, called me ugly, said I should know my place. After that, I learned it was safer not to want things. Safer not to put myself in a position to be rejected. Julian's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. They were children being cruel because they didn't know any better. You can't let the ignorance of 11-year-olds define your worth. But it wasn't just that, Mara said quietly. It was everything after. Being the last one chosen for teams in gym class, never being asked to dances, watching my prettier friends get attention while I was ignored. My own cousin, Vanessa, she used to introduce me to people as her plain cousin, like it was my defining characteristic. After a while, you start to believe it. You internalize it, and you build your life around it. And now? Julian asked. Now I'm comfortable, Mara said. I have a job I love, a quiet life. I don't need validation from others. I've learned to validate myself. That's a lie. The words were gentle but firm. You've learned to protect yourself by lowering your expectations. That's survival, not comfort. There's a difference. Mara felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt in years. How do you do that? She asked. How do you see through people so easily? Because I recognize the armor, Julian said. I wear my own version of it. Mine looks different than yours. Mine is aggression, intensity, keeping people at a distance by being too much, too demanding, too uncompromising. Yours is invisibility, making yourself small, unobtrusive, easy to overlook. But we're both doing the same thing, protecting ourselves from rejection by never fully showing up. "What if I don't know how to show up?" Mara whispered. "What if I've been invisible for so long I don't remember how to be anything else?" "Then we figure it out together," Julian said. "Because I've spent 34 years being too much, and I'm tired. I'm tired of relationships that are performances. I'm tired of women who want the idea of me, but are terrified of the reality. I'm tired of being alone in rooms full of people. And yesterday, watching you at that wedding, I realized something. Maybe being too much and being invisible are just two sides of the same coin. Two ways of hiding in plain sight. The main course arrived. Fresh pasta with wild boar ragu, the sauce rich and complex. They ate slowly, the conversation flowing between deep topics and lighter ones. Mara found herself laughing at Julian's dry observations about the wedding, his spot-on impression of the officiant, his story about Cole practicing his vows in front of the mirror for 3 hours. He made her feel clever, funny, worth listening to. And he actually listened, leaning forward when she spoke, his eyes never leaving her face, as if everything she said mattered. "Have you always wanted to work with children?" he asked. "Always," Mara said. "Books were my refuge growing up. The library was the one place where I felt like I belonged, where it didn't matter what I looked like or who I was. I could be anyone, go anywhere, feel everything. I wanted to give that to other kids, especially the ones who felt like they didn't fit. The invisible ones. Like you." "Like me," she confirmed. "I see them sometimes. The quiet kids who sit in the corner, who ask for book recommendations in whispers, like they're afraid to take up space. And I make sure they know they're welcome, that they matter, that their quietness isn't a flaw. It's just a different way of being in the world." Julian reached across the table and took her hand. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the touch sending shivers up her arm. "You're remarkable," he said. "And I know you don't believe me. I know you think this is some kind of game or passing fancy. But I need you to understand something. I've dated actresses and models, and women who made careers out of being beautiful. And I've been bored out of my mind within 15 minutes, because there was nothing beneath the surface. No depth, no substance, no authenticity. But you, I could listen to you talk about children's books for hours. I could watch the way your face lights up when you talk about something you care about, and never get tired of it. You're not invisible, Mara. You're a fucking supernova that everyone else has been too blind to see." Mara's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever looked at her like she was something precious. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared that you'll see who I really am and realize you made a mistake. Scared that I'll believe you, and then you'll leave, and I'll be even more alone than I was before." "Then let me prove you wrong," Julian said. "Give me a chance to show you that I mean this, that I see you, all of you, and I'm not going anywhere." Marcello brought dessert, tiramisu that melted on the tongue, espresso so strong it felt like a jolt of electricity. The restaurant slowly emptied around them until they were the last customers, still talking, still learning each other. Julian told her about his father's death, how it had forced him to grow up too fast, to take over a business at 22 when he should have still been figuring out who he was. How Cole had always been the favorite because he was easier, more pliable, while Julian was difficult, questioning, unwilling to just accept things as they were. Mara told him about her parents' divorce, how her mother had chosen a new husband over her own daughter, how Vanessa's family had taken her in, but never let her forget she was Charity, a burden to be endured rather than a child to be loved. It was after midnight when they finally left. Marcello hugged them both, whispered something in Italian to Julian that made him smile. Outside, the street was quiet, lit by old-fashioned lampposts that cast golden pools of light on the cobblestones. "I don't want this to end," Julian said, "so let's not end it. Walk with me?" They walked through the old quarter, past closed shops and sleeping houses, their hands brushing occasionally, but not quite holding. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine from someone's garden. "Can I ask you something?" Mara said. "Anything." "Why me?" "Really? I need to understand." Julian stopped walking, turning to face her fully. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones with reverent gentleness. "Because when I look at you, I see home. I see peace. I see someone who understands what it's like to feel like you don't fit anywhere, and who's built a life anyway. I see strength that doesn't need to announce itself, intelligence that doesn't need validation, beauty that exists whether anyone acknowledges it or not. And I see someone who could teach me how to be softer, how to be present, how to believe that maybe I deserve to be loved for who I am, not what I provide." He leaned his forehead against hers. "You make me want to be brave enough to be vulnerable. And that terrifies me as much as it terrifies you. But I think that's the point. Love is supposed to be terrifying. It's supposed to crack you open and make you feel too much and leave you defenseless. And I've been defended for so long I've forgotten what it feels like to just feel." Mara's tears were flowing freely now. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever made her feel like she was worth this kind of raw honesty. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I," Julian admitted. "But I think that's okay. I think we figure it out together, one day at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment of bravery at a time." He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. "Can I see you tomorrow? And the day after that? And the day after that? Can we try this, whatever this is, and see where it goes?" Mara thought about her safe, invisible life, her quiet apartment, her predictable routines, her carefully managed expectations. She thought about all the years she'd spent protecting herself from disappointment by never hoping for anything more. And then she thought about how it felt to be seen, really seen, for the first time in her life. "Yes," she said. "Yes, let's try." The next 3 months felt like learning to breathe after a lifetime underwater. Julian called every morning before she went to work, his voice rough with sleep, asking about her dreams, her plans for the day, what story she was reading to the children. He texted her throughout the day, random observations, questions, photos of things that made him think of her. A window display with antique books, a little girl in the park reading under a tree, a quote from a novel he'd started reading because Mara mentioned she loved it. He showed up at the library during her lunch breaks, bringing sandwiches from a deli he'd discovered, sitting with her in the small break room while she ate, listening to her talk about the children, the books, the small triumphs and frustrations of her day. He looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world, and slowly, gradually, Mara started to believe it might be true. Their second date was a bookstore. Julian had laughed when she suggested it, expecting fancy restaurants or exclusive clubs, but he'd shown up in jeans and a sweater, ready to spend 3 hours wandering through aisles of books, watching her face light up as she found treasures, listening to her explain why certain books mattered, why stories had the power to change lives. He bought a stack of children's books she mentioned the library needed, had them delivered anonymously the next week. Their third date was a cooking class. Mara had never cooked anything more complicated than pasta, and Julian had confessed that despite Marcello's attempts to teach him, he was hopeless in the kitchen. They'd laughed until they cried, trying to make homemade ravioli, ending up covered in flour, the pasta looking like abstract art rather than food. But they'd eaten it anyway, sitting on the floor of the teaching kitchen after everyone else had left, drinking cheap wine and talking about everything and nothing. Their fourth date was the night everything changed. Julian took her to his penthouse, a stunning space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, all clean lines and expensive furniture that somehow still felt impersonal, like a hotel rather than a home. "I wanted you to see where I live," he said, leading her through the rooms. "But I also wanted to show you something." He opened a door to a room she hadn't expected. It was filled with musical instruments, a grand piano by the window, guitars on stands, a cello in the corner, a violin case on a shelf. Mara turned to him in surprise. "I didn't know you played." "I don't," Julian said. "Not anymore. My father played. Piano, mostly. It was the one time he seemed human, when he was lost in music. He taught me when I was young, before he became consumed by the business. After he died, I couldn't touch it. It hurt too much. But I kept his instruments, kept this room, like a museum to a version of him I barely remember." Mara walked to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "Do you want to remember?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Julian admitted. "I'm afraid if I let myself remember the good parts, I'll have to face how much I lost, how much he lost by choosing work over family, how much I'm becoming like him." "You're not like him," Mara said firmly. "You're here. You're present. You show up. That's not something someone consumed by work does." Julian sat on the piano bench, and after a moment, Mara sat beside him. He stared at the keys like they held answers he was afraid to find. "Play something," she encouraged. "I don't remember how." "Your hands remember," Mara said. "Trust them." Slowly, hesitantly, Julian placed his hands on the keys. The first notes were halting, uncertain, but then muscle memory took over. A melody emerged, melancholic and beautiful, filling the room with sound that felt like grief and hope tangled together. Mara watched his face as he played, saw the tears tracking down his cheeks, the decades of suppressed emotion finally finding release. When the last note faded, Julian sat in silence, his hands trembling on the keys. "Thank you," he finally whispered. "For what?" "For making me brave enough to feel again." He turned to her, his dark eyes intense. "I'm falling in love with you, Mara. I know it's too soon. I know it's supposed to be more complicated than this. But it's the truth. And I'm tired of not saying true things." Mara's heart felt like it might burst. "I'm falling in love with you, too. And you're right, it's terrifying. But it's also the most real thing I've ever felt." Julian kissed her then, soft and slow and reverent like she was, something precious he was afraid of breaking. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Stay tonight," he said. I just don't want to be alone. I don't want to go back to that big empty apartment and pretend I'm okay without you here." Mara nodded. "I'll stay." They didn't make love that night. Instead, they lay in Julian's bed, fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms, talking until the sky started to lighten with dawn. They talked about childhoods and dreams and fears and hopes. Julian told her about the pressure of running a company he'd never wanted to run, of living up to a legacy that felt more like a prison than a privilege. Mara told him about the loneliness of being overlooked, of building a life around not needing anyone, because needing people had only brought pain. And somewhere in those early morning hours, between confessions and silences, they built something new, a foundation of trust and understanding, and the radical vulnerability of being completely seen. When Mara finally fell asleep in Julian's arms, she dreamed of music and light and a future that no longer felt impossible. The next morning, Julian made them coffee. Terrible coffee that made Mara laugh, and they ate toast standing in his massive kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes, looking like they'd survived something together. "I have to meet with Cole today," Julian said, grimacing. "He wants to discuss the new hotel project in Singapore. I've been avoiding it because I knew he'd chosen the location without proper market analysis, but I can't put it off anymore." "Will you fight?" Mara asked. "Probably," Julian admitted. "Cole hates when I question his decisions. He thinks I'm undermining him, trying to prove I'm better. But I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to keep our family business from making expensive mistakes." "Maybe he needs to make those mistakes," Mara suggested gently. "Maybe that's how he learns." Julian looked at her, considering. "You think I'm too controlling?" "I think you're protective," Mara said. "Of the business, of your family legacy, of your brother, even if you won't admit it. But sometimes protecting people means letting them fall. Being there to help them up, but letting them fall." Julian pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "How did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise," Mara said. "I just know what it's like to be underestimated, to have people assume you can't handle things. Sometimes the greatest gift is believing someone is capable of more than they've shown you." Julian did meet with Cole that afternoon, and it went exactly as he'd predicted. They fought about Singapore, about Cole's impulsive decision-making, about the fundamental differences in how they saw the business. But for the first time, Julian didn't let it consume him. He came back to Mara's apartment that evening, exhausted and frustrated. But when she opened the door, something in him settled. She'd made dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. But the small table in her tiny kitchen was set with mismatched dishes and candles, and it felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. "Tell me about it," she said. And he did. He told her everything, the words pouring out while they ate, while she listened without judgment, without trying to fix it, just being present with him in his frustration. And when he finished, drained and raw, she simply took his hand and said, "You did your best. That's all you can do." Sometimes people have to learn their own lessons in their own time. They fell into a rhythm after that. Julian worked long hours, rebuilding relationships with clients his father had neglected, fixing problems Cole created with his impulsiveness. But every evening he came to Mara. Sometimes they went out, exploring small restaurants and quiet museums and parks where they could walk without being recognized. Sometimes they stayed in, cooking together in her small kitchen, reading on her worn couch with Dickens curled between them, talking about everything and nothing. Julian taught Mara about art and architecture and the business of building empires. Mara taught Julian about literature and patience and the art of being present. She showed him how to find joy in small moments, how to stop constantly planning for the future and just exist in the now. One Saturday, Mara took Julian to the library for children's story time. He'd been resistant at first, uncomfortable with the idea of being around so many people, of being seen in such a public, vulnerable way. But she'd convinced him, promising that children were the best audience because they didn't care about his money or his name. They just cared about the story. He sat in the back during her reading, watching as she transformed into something magical. Her voice brought characters to life, her face animated with each turn of the page, and the children sat mesmerized, even the wiggly ones, even the ones who usually couldn't sit still. But what struck Julian most was how she saw them, really saw them. She noticed the shy girl in the corner and drew her into the conversation gently, asking her opinion about what the character should do next. She noticed the boy with the worn shoes and the too small jacket, and made sure to set aside a book for him to take home. No questions asked, no judgment. She noticed the little girl who spoke only Spanish and seamlessly switched languages, making sure she felt included, valued, seen. After the reading, Julian helped her shelve books. "You're incredible with them," he said. "You make each one feel like they're the only child in the room." "Because in that moment, they are," Mara said simply. Every child deserves to feel like they matter, like their thoughts and feelings and existence is important, especially the ones who feel invisible. "Like you did." "Like I did," Mara confirmed. "I remember what it felt like to be overlooked, to feel like I didn't matter. I never want a child to feel that way. Not in my library. Not on my watch." Julian set down the books he was holding and pulled her close. "I love you," he said. "I love your heart and your kindness and the way you see people. I love how you make me want to be better, softer, more present. I love everything about you, and I need you to know that." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes." "Good," Julian said. "Love should be a little scary. It should make you feel too much. That's how you know it's real." That night, they made love for the first time. It was slow and tender, and nothing like either of them had experienced before. Julian was reverent, patient, taking his time to learn every inch of her, to discover what made her gasp, what made her moan, what made her arch into his touch. Mara let herself be vulnerable in a way she'd never been, trusting him with her body, with her pleasure, with the deepest parts of herself she'd always kept hidden. Afterward, wrapped in her sheets, Julian traced patterns on her skin. "I was terrified," he admitted. "Terrified I wouldn't be what you needed, that I'd be too much or not enough, or that you'd realize you deserved better." Mara turned to face him, her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "You're exactly what I need. Not despite who you are, but because of it. All of it. The intensity and the vulnerability, and the way you make me feel like I'm the only person in the world who matters." Julian kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "I spent so many years thinking I had to be perfect to be loved, that I had to have all the answers, never show weakness, never let anyone see the parts of me that were broken. But with you, I can just be, broken and whole at the same time." "You're not broken," Mara whispered. "You're human. And that's more than enough." The months passed in a blur of deepening connection. They met each other's worlds. Mara attended business dinners with Julian, learning to navigate the complex social dynamics of his industry, surprised to find she was good at it. Her quiet observation skills, the same ones that made her a good librarian, helped her read people, understand unspoken dynamics, offer insights Julian found invaluable. Julian volunteered at the library, reading to children on Saturday mornings, his deep voice bringing stories to life in ways that made the children beg for more. He donated funds to expand the children's section, to buy new books, to create a reading corner with comfortable chairs and good lighting where kids could lose themselves in stories. He never asked for recognition, never wanted his name on a plaque. He just wanted to support something Mara cared about. But not everything was perfect. There were challenges. Vanessa returned from her honeymoon and immediately started causing problems. She hated that Mara was dating Julian, hated that her plain cousin had somehow landed the more successful, more interesting Ashford brother. She made snide comments at family gatherings, tried to sow doubt, suggested Julian was slumming, that he'd eventually get bored and move on to someone more appropriate. Mara tried to ignore it, but the words burrowed under her skin, feeding the old insecurities she'd worked so hard to overcome. Julian's family wasn't much better. His mother was appalled that he was serious about a librarian, someone with no social standing, no family wealth, no connections that could benefit the business. She made her disapproval clear at every opportunity, pointedly excluding Mara from family events, making comments about appropriate matches and family expectations. Cole was caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace, but ultimately siding with tradition, with their mother's vision of what Julian's life should look like. The breaking point came at the Ashford Foundation Gala, an annual event where the family's charitable contributions were celebrated and new initiatives announced. Julian had insisted Mara attend as his date, despite his mother's protests. Mara had bought a new dress for the occasion, a deep burgundy gown that made her feel almost beautiful, almost worthy of standing beside Julian in his world. But from the moment they arrived, she felt the judgment, the whispers, the barely concealed looks of disdain. The way Julian's mother introduced her to important guests as Julian's friend rather than his girlfriend, diminishing their relationship with a single word. Mara endured it with grace, smiling through the discomfort, making polite conversation, trying to be what Julian needed. But during dinner, Vanessa, seated at the same table, had too much champagne and too little discretion. She'd laughed loudly, drawing attention, and said to the table at large, "Isn't it funny how some people end up in places they don't belong? I mean, Mara's great with kids and books, but at an event like this, she's so out of her depth, it's almost painful to watch." The table went silent. Mara felt her face burn, felt the familiar shame washing over her, the old voice in her head saying, "You don't belong. You never did. You were foolish to think you could be enough." But before she could respond, before she could make a polite excuse and flee, Julian's hand found hers under the table. He squeezed once, firm and reassuring, and then he turned to Vanessa, with an expression so cold it could have frozen fire. "You're right, Vanessa," Julian said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent table. "Mara doesn't belong at an event like this, because she's genuine, kind, and actually cares about making the world better, not just appearing to care for social credit. She spends her days helping children discover the magic of reading, creating safe spaces for kids who feel invisible, making a real difference in real lives. While you spend your days spending Cole's money and tearing down anyone who makes you feel inadequate by simply existing. So no, Mara doesn't belong here. She's too good for this. Too good for the performative charity, the empty conversations, the backstabbing masked as concern. And frankly, she's too good for me. But I'm selfish enough to love her anyway, and hope she'll tolerate my flawed family long enough to build a life with me." The table erupted in uncomfortable whispers. Julian's mother looked apoplectic. Cole stared at his brother in shock. But Julian wasn't finished. He stood, still holding Mara's hand, pulling her up with him. "We're leaving," he announced. "Mara, understandably, has better things to do than endure insults disguised as concern. And I have better things to do than pretend I care about impressing people whose opinions mean nothing to me. To everyone here who's been lovely to Mara, thank you. To everyone who hasn't, kindly reassess your priorities." And with that, he led her out of the ballroom, through the lobby, into the cool night air. Mara was shaking, adrenaline and emotion overwhelming her. "Julian, you can't. Your family." "I don't care," Julian said fiercely. "Do you hear me? I don't care what they think. I don't care about maintaining appearances or meeting expectations or playing the role they've written for me. I care about you. I care about building a life that's real and honest and full of love, not empty performances. Everything else is just noise." "But they're your family," Mara whispered. "They'll never accept me now." "Then they don't accept me either," Julian said. "Because you're my family now. You're my home. You're the person I choose every single day, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it." He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense in the streetlight. I meant what I said in there. You're too good for me. Too good for this world of shallow relationships and transactional interactions. But I'm asking you anyway. Build a life with me. Not in their world, but in ours. One where what matters is how we treat each other, how we show up, how we create meaning. Mara's tears were falling freely now. Yes, she said. Yes, I want that. I want us. Julian kissed her then, right there on the street outside the gala, and Mara felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, chosen, treasured. And it was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely right. The fallout from the gala was immediate and intense. Julian's mother called the next morning, demanding he apologize, insisting he was throwing away his future for an inappropriate relationship. Julian listened for approximately 30 seconds before calmly informing her that his future was his own to build, that Mara was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and that if she couldn't accept that, they'd need to establish very firm boundaries. Cole tried a different approach, calling Mara directly, suggesting she was being selfish, that she was coming between Julian and his family, that she should think about what was best for everyone, not just herself. Mara, to her surprise, found her voice. She told Cole that Julian was capable of making his own decisions, that their relationship was based on mutual respect and love, and that if Cole truly cared about his brother's happiness, he'd support him instead of trying to control him. The conversation ended badly, but Mara didn't regret it. She was tired of making herself small to make others comfortable. Vanessa sent a nasty text, accusing Mara of social climbing, of using Julian for his money and status. Mara blocked her number without responding. She'd spent too many years accepting Vanessa's cruelty, making excuses for it, trying to earn approval that would never come. She was done. Julian suggested they get away for a while, escape the family drama, and just be together. He rented a cottage by the ocean, a small, weathered place with blue shutters and a wraparound porch that overlooked the water. They spent 2 weeks there, just the two of them, walking on the beach, cooking simple meals, reading books, making love, talking about futures and dreams, and what they wanted to build together. It was during this time that Mara truly understood what love could be, not the dramatic, tumultuous kind portrayed in movies, but the quiet, steady kind that showed up every day. Julian made her coffee every morning, exactly how she liked it. He listened to her talk about the children's books she was reading, asking thoughtful questions, engaging genuinely. He held her when she cried about the family rejection, not trying to fix it, just being present with her pain. And Mara learned to be there for Julian in return. When he had nightmares about his father, about failing, about becoming the kind of man who sacrificed everything for success, she held him, reminded him that he was nothing like that his capacity for love and vulnerability made him extraordinary. When he struggled with business decisions, torn between doing what was right and what was expected, she talked him through it, helping him see that integrity mattered more than approval. They became partners in the truest sense, not needing each other to be complete, but choosing each other to be better. On their last night at the cottage, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Julian was quiet, his arm around Mara's shoulders, her head resting on his chest. "I've been thinking," he finally said. About what comes next. About building a life that's ours, not anyone else's. About creating something real and lasting." He pulled back slightly, reaching into his pocket. Mara's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. Julian turned to face her fully, his dark eyes serious. "I know we haven't been together that long by conventional standards. I know my family is a disaster, and there will be challenges and complications. I know I'm intense and difficult, and sometimes I don't know how to be soft. But I also know that you're the person I want to wake up next to every morning. You're the person I want to tell about my day, the good parts and the terrible parts. You're the person who makes me believe I can be better, do better, build something that matters. He opened the box, revealing a simple platinum band with a single, perfect diamond. Marry me, Mara. Not because of family expectations, or social pressure, or any of the bullshit reasons people get married in my world. Marry me because you love me, and I love you, and we want to build a life together. Marry me because you make me brave enough to believe in futures. Marry me because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Mara's hands were shaking. Tears streamed down her face. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible, convinced she'd spend her life alone, that she was too plain, too ordinary, too forgettable to be chosen. And now this man, this brilliant, intense, complicated man who could have anyone, was asking her to be his wife. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, I'll marry you. Not despite your intensity or your complications, but because of them. Because you see me. Because you make me believe I'm worth seeing. Because loving you has taught me how to love myself. Julian slid the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly, and then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. We're going to build something beautiful, he whispered into her hair. Something real and honest and ours. We're going to create a family based on love, not obligation. A home based on choice, not expectation. And we're going to show everyone who doubted us that love doesn't require approval. It just requires commitment. They stayed at the cottage for 3 more days, just them and their new future, before returning to reality. The engagement announcement caused exactly the reaction they'd expected. Julian's mother was horrified, threatening to cut him off financially, to remove him from the family business. Julian calmly informed her that he'd already been consulting with lawyers, that he had his own wealth separate from the family trust, and that if she forced him to choose between Mara and the Ashford legacy, he'd choose Mara without hesitation. Cole tried to mediate, but he was weak, unwilling to stand up to their mother, unwilling to support his brother against family pressure. In the end, Julian made a decision that surprised everyone. He stepped down from his position as CEO of Ashford Hotels, not in defeat, but as a choice. He'd spent his entire adult life running a company he'd never wanted to run, living a life designed by his father's expectations. It was time, he told Mara, to build something of his own. He started a new venture, a boutique hotel company focused on restoring historic properties with respect for their original character, partnering with local communities rather than displacing them, creating spaces that honored authenticity over luxury. It was smaller, more personal, more aligned with his values, and it was his. Mara continued working at the library, but Julian's financial freedom allowed her to start a non-profit on the side, a literacy program that brought books and reading resources to underserved communities, that trained volunteers to provide one-on-one reading support to struggling children. She called it the Visible Child Foundation, and it became her passion project, her way of ensuring that no child felt as invisible as she once had. They planned a small wedding, just close friends, and the family members who actually supported them. Marcello insisted on catering, creating a feast that was more about love than ostentation. They held it in a botanical garden, surrounded by flowers and light, and people who genuinely cared about their happiness. The ceremony was simple but profound. Julian wrote his own vows, standing in front of everyone with tears in his eyes, as he promised to see Mara, really see her, every day for the rest of his life. To honor her quietness as strength, her kindness as courage, her love as the greatest gift he'd ever received. Mara's vows were equally powerful, promising to stand beside Julian through challenges and triumphs, to be his soft place to land, to love him, not despite his intensity, but because of it, to build a life together based on radical honesty and unwavering commitment. When they kissed, sealing their promises, Mara felt something she'd never felt before: completeness. Not because Julian completed her, she was already whole, but because together they created something greater than either of them alone. The reception was joyful and intimate, filled with laughter and music and genuine celebration. Marcello gave a toast that made everyone cry, talking about the skinny, sad 12-year-old boy who'd walked into his restaurant and the extraordinary man he'd become. One of the children from Mara's library stood up, unprompted, and gave a halting speech about how Miss Mara had taught her that being quiet didn't mean being invisible, that she could be exactly who she was and still matter. Julian danced with Mara to a song his father used to play on the piano, and he whispered in her ear that he finally understood what his father had lost by choosing work over love, and he was grateful every day that he'd made a different choice. As the evening wound down, as guests started to leave, and the garden lights twinkled in the growing darkness, Julian and Mara stood together, watching it all. "This is it," Mara said softly. "This is what I always dreamed of but never believed I could have." "What?" Julian asked. "Being chosen, being seen, being loved exactly as I am." Julian pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You were always worth choosing. The world was just too blind to see it. But I see you. I'll always see you." They honeymooned in Italy, staying in small villages and historic inns, eating in family, restaurants where the owners treated them like beloved relatives, walking through ancient streets hand in hand. Julian took Mara to Marcello's hometown, meeting his extended family, learning to make pasta from his grandmother, who barely spoke English, but communicated perfectly through food and smiles and warm hugs. Mara felt something shift during that trip. She'd spent so long defining herself by what she wasn't: not beautiful enough, not outgoing enough, not worthy enough. But in Italy, surrounded by people who valued authenticity and warmth and genuine connection, she started to see herself differently. She was enough. She'd always been enough. She just needed to believe it. When they returned home, they moved into a new apartment, smaller than Julian's penthouse, but filled with warmth and character. They chose every piece of furniture together, filled the shelves with books, created a home that reflected both of them. Julian set up a music room, filling it with instruments, and started taking piano lessons again, rediscovering the joy his father had first shown him. Mara created a reading nook by the window, a space where she could curl up with books and dreams and the profound contentment of being exactly where she belonged. They established rhythms and rituals: Sunday morning pancakes, evening walks in the park, Friday night dinners at Marcello's. They fought sometimes because real relationships involve conflict, but they fought fairly, with respect and the commitment to understanding rather than winning. Julian learned to soften his intensity, to listen without immediately trying to fix things. Mara learned to voice her needs, to take up space, to believe she had the right to be heard. They grew together, became better versions of themselves, not because they needed to change to be acceptable, but because love created a safe space for growth. A year into their marriage, Mara got pregnant. It was unplanned, but welcomed with joy and terror in equal measure. Julian was thrilled and terrified, worried he'd repeat his father's mistakes, prioritizing work over family. Mara reassured him, reminded him that awareness was half the battle, that he was already a different kind of man making different choices. The pregnancy was challenging. Mara struggled with morning sickness and fatigue, And there were moments when the old insecurities resurfaced. She worried she wasn't glowing and beautiful like pregnant women in magazines, that she was just tired and uncomfortable and very human. But Julian loved her through it all, rubbing her feet when they swelled, bringing her ginger tea for the nausea, telling her every day that she was beautiful, that creating life was the most extraordinary thing a body could do. He came to every doctor's appointment, holding her hand during ultrasounds, crying when they first heard the heartbeat. When they found out they were having a daughter, Julian looked at Mara with such tenderness, it made her heart ache. "We're going to raise her to know she's enough," he said. "Exactly as she is. We're going to teach her that her worth isn't determined by how others see her, but by how she sees herself. We're going to make sure she never feels invisible." Mara gave birth on a rainy Tuesday in October, after 18 hours of labor that left her exhausted and overwhelmed and absolutely in love. Their daughter, Elena Rose, came into the world screaming her presence, demanding to be seen and heard. She had Julian's dark eyes and Mara's gentle spirit. And from the moment Julian held her, tears streaming down his face, Mara knew he was going to be an extraordinary father. The first few months were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves and moments of pure magic. Julian was hands-on in a way that surprised even him, changing diapers and learning to swaddle and walking the floors at 3 in the morning singing off-key lullabies. Mara watched him become softer, more patient, more present. Fatherhood transformed him in beautiful ways, taught him that love didn't require perfection, just showing up. Mara struggled with postpartum challenges, the physical recovery and the emotional adjustment, and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for a tiny human. But Julian was there, every step, never making her feel like she had to do it alone, or be perfect, or live up to some impossible standard. They figured it out together, made mistakes together, celebrated small victories together. When Elena was 6 months old, they had a christening at the same botanical garden where they'd married. Julian's mother attended, finally, begrudgingly accepting that her son had built a life on his own terms. She held Elena with visible discomfort, as if babies were foreign objects, but there was something in her eyes when she looked at her granddaughter. Softness, maybe, or recognition that some things mattered more than social standing. Cole came too, with Vanessa, who'd become pregnant shortly after Elena's birth and suddenly wanted to repair the relationship, seeing Mara as a useful source of parenting advice rather than competition. Mara was gracious but boundaried, willing to be civil but unwilling to forget years of cruelty. Marcello was Elena's godfather, a choice that delighted him and confused Julian's family. But it made perfect sense to Julian and Mara. Marcello had taught Julian about love and authenticity and showing up. He'd been more of a father than Julian's own father, in many ways. He deserved the honor. The christening celebration was beautiful and intimate, filled with the people who truly mattered. And as Mara held Elena, watching Julian talk animatedly with Marcello, watching the children from her library programs playing in the garden, watching the life they'd built together unfold around her, she felt something profound. Belonging. Not the desperate seeking kind, but the settled, confident kind. She belonged here, in this life, with this man, with this child, with these people who saw her and chose her and loved her. As Elena grew, Mara and Julian were intentional about the environment they created. They filled their home with books and music and art and laughter. They traveled, showing Elena different cultures and ways of being, teaching her that the world was vast and full of possibilities. They volunteered together at the library, at Mara's foundation, teaching Elena early that privilege came with responsibility, that making the world better was everyone's job. Julian's business thrived, built on principles of integrity and community partnership rather than pure profit maximization. He proved that success didn't require sacrificing values, that you could build an empire and still be a good human. Mara's foundation expanded, reaching more children, providing more resources, creating more spaces where invisible kids could feel seen. She wrote a children's book about a girl who felt invisible until she realized her quietness was actually a superpower, that observing and understanding and being present were gifts, not flaws. It became a bestseller, touching thousands of children who saw themselves in the story. When Elena was 3, they had a son, Marcus Julian, who came into the world as dramatically as his sister, demanding attention and giving nothing but joy. Their family felt complete, chaotic, and beautiful, and perfectly imperfect. Julian proved to be the father he'd feared he couldn't be. He was present at every school event, every bedtime story, every scraped knee that needed bandaging. He taught Elena to play piano, passing down his father's gift in a healthier way, with patience and encouragement rather than pressure. He taught Marcus to be gentle and strong simultaneously, to honor emotions rather than suppress them. Mara taught both children to read, to love stories, to see magic in ordinary moments. She taught them empathy and kindness and the radical act of seeing others truly. And together, she and Julian taught them that love was a choice, that family was built through commitment and presence, that worth was inherent, not earned. Years passed in the beautiful, challenging way years do when you're building a life that matters. There were hard moments, of course. Julian's mother passed away, and despite their complicated relationship, her death brought grief and the pain of what could have been if she'd chosen connection over control. Cole and Vanessa divorced, surprising no one, and Cole finally started building his own life, separate from family expectations. There were business challenges and financial stresses, and the normal struggles of raising children and maintaining a marriage. But through it all, Julian and Mara held to their foundation: honesty, vulnerability, choosing each other daily. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to the cottage by the ocean where Julian had proposed. Marcello watched the children for the weekend, delighted to have his honorary grandchildren to spoil. Julian and Mara walked the same beach they'd walked a decade earlier, older now, marked by life and parenthood, and building something lasting. 10 years, Mara said, watching the waves. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Julian said, pulling her close. It's been both. The fastest and slowest decade of my life. Mara looked up at him, this man who'd seen her when everyone else looked past her, who'd loved her into believing in her own worth. Do you ever regret it? Giving up your family's business, walking away from that life? Not for a single second, Julian said firmly. That life was a prison. This life, with you, with our children, with the work we're doing, this is freedom. This is purpose. This is everything. They made love that night in the cottage, slow and familiar, and still exciting after a decade together. Bodies that knew each other completely, that had created life together, that had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs. Afterward, wrapped in sheets and each other, Julian traced patterns on Mara's skin the way he'd done on their first night together. I need to tell you something, he said softly. Mara tensed slightly. What? I've been offered an opportunity. A group of investors wants me to expand the business internationally, to take the model we've built here and replicate it in Europe, in Asia. It would mean significant growth, significant success. Mara waited, sensing there was more, and I turned it down. Why? Because it would mean less time with you and the kids. More travel, more pressure, more of the things I walked away from when I left Ashford Hotels. And I realized something. I already have everything I want. This business isn't about building an empire anymore. It's about doing good work on a human scale. It's about being present for the life I've chosen. Mara's eyes filled with tears. You chose us over growth. I chose us over growth that would cost what matters most, Julian clarified. I'm not interested in building something massive that consumes my life. I'm interested in building something meaningful that fits inside my life. There's a difference. Mara kissed him, deep and grateful and full of love. You're extraordinary, she whispered. I'm just finally learning what my father never did, Julian said. That the measure of success isn't what you accumulate, it's what you nurture. And I'd rather nurture this, us, our family, our values, than build another empire that looks impressive, but feels empty. They spent the rest of the weekend talking about dreams and possibilities. Mara shared that she wanted to write more books, to expand her reach, to touch more children who needed to hear that being different wasn't being less. Julian encouraged it, offered to handle more of the parenting responsibilities, to give her time to write, to create, to build her own legacy. They talked about Elena's growing interest in music, about Marcus's tender heart, and how to help him navigate a world that often punished sensitivity in boys. They talked about aging parents and changing friendships, and the reality that life kept evolving, kept challenging you to grow. But underneath it all was the foundation they'd built: trust and honesty, and the commitment to choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. When they returned home, Elena ran to them with stories about all the adventures she'd had with Uncle Marcello, about making pasta and learning Italian phrases and being allowed to stay up late. Marcus clung to Mara's leg, happy to have her back, but playing it cool the way 3-year-olds do. Marcello hugged them both, his eyes knowing. You look happy, he said to Julian. Rested. At peace. I am, Julian confirmed. I finally understand what you tried to teach me all those years ago. That the best things in life aren't built, they're nurtured. They grow slowly, with attention and care. Like pasta dough, like children, like love. Life continued its rhythm. Mara published her second book, this one about a boy who everyone said was too sensitive, too emotional, too much, until he learned his capacity to feel deeply was actually his superpower. It resonated even more than the first, touching parents and children alike. She started getting invited to speak at schools and conferences, sharing her message about seeing invisible children, about creating spaces where every child felt valued. Julian supported her fully, traveling with her when possible, managing the home front when she had to go alone. He proved that partnership meant supporting each other's dreams, not competing with them. Elena started piano lessons in earnest, showing real talent and passion. Julian worked with her patiently, never pushing, always encouraging, creating the relationship with music his father should have given him. Marcus loved stories, just like his mother, and they established a nightly ritual where Mara read to him, and then he'd retell the story in his own words, adding details and changing endings, showing early signs of creative imagination. The Visible Child Foundation expanded, opening reading centers in 3 more cities, partnering with schools to identify struggling readers and provide intensive support. Mara hired staff, built a team, but stayed connected to the work, visiting centers regularly, reading to children, reminding herself why it all mattered. Julian's boutique hotel company grew steadily, not explosively, but sustainably. He restored beautiful historic properties, created jobs in local communities, built partnerships based on mutual benefit rather than extraction. He proved that business could be both profitable and ethical, that success didn't require sacrificing integrity. On Elena's 10th birthday, They threw a party in the botanical garden where they'd married. All her friends came, but also many of the children from Mara's programs. Kids from different backgrounds and circumstances, all playing together, all belonging. Watching them, Mara felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what she'd always wanted. Not perfection, but connection. Not visibility through being noticed by everyone, but being truly seen by the people who mattered. Julian found her standing alone, watching the celebration. "You okay?" he asked, sliding an arm around her waist. "More than okay," Mara said. "I was just thinking about that bridesmaid dress, the terrible emerald green one." Julian laughed. "The one that didn't fit." "That's the one," Mara confirmed. "I stood in front of those mirrors feeling invisible, feeling like I'd never be chosen, never matter. And then I looked up during the ceremony and saw you watching me, and everything changed." "You were never invisible," Julian said. "I saw you immediately. You just didn't know you were visible yet." "But now?" "Now I know," Mara said. "Now I understand that visibility isn't about everyone seeing you. It's about being seen by yourself first, and then by the people who matter. It's about choosing to show up fully, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary." Elena ran over, grabbing their hands. "Come dance with me, both of you." They let themselves be pulled onto the makeshift dance floor, surrounded by children and laughter and pure joy. Julian spun Mara, then Elena, then tried to lift Marcus, who squealed with delight. And Mara thought about the journey from invisible to visible, from hidden to chosen, from convinced she wasn't enough to knowing she'd always been enough. That night, after the party was cleaned up and the children were asleep, Mara and Julian sat on their balcony, drinking wine and watching the city lights. 20 years from now," Julian said, "what do you think we'll remember about this time?" "The children being small," Mara said. "The chaos and the sweetness, and how fast it all goes." "What else?" "That we built something real," Mara said. "That we chose love over approval, authenticity over performance, connection over success. That we proved, at least to ourselves, that you don't have to sacrifice who you are to be loved. You just have to be brave enough to show who you are and trust that the right people will see it." Julian took her hand, the one that still wore the ring he'd given her at the cottage. "You changed my life," he said. "You taught me what love actually means. Not possession or performance, but partnership, presence, choosing each other over and over until it becomes as natural as breathing." Mara rested her head on his shoulder. "We changed each other's lives. That's what love does when it's real. It transforms both people, makes them braver, softer, more themselves." Years continued to pass in that beautiful, bittersweet way. Elena grew into a talented young musician with her father's intensity and her mother's gentle wisdom. She started composing her own pieces, creating music that spoke to the complexity of being human. Marcus became a writer, following in his mother's footsteps, crafting stories that made people feel seen and understood. Both children carried forward the legacy their parents built, that worth was inherent, that kindness mattered more than achievement, that the most important work was nurturing connection. Mara's foundation became her primary work as the children grew more independent. She wrote more books, spoke at conferences around the world, advocated for literacy and educational equity. She became a voice for invisible children everywhere, proving that you could rise from feeling unseen to making sure others were seen. Julian's business reached a comfortable equilibrium, successful enough to provide financial security, small enough that he could maintain his values and his presence with family. He served on nonprofit boards, mentored young entrepreneurs, and taught business courses at the local university. passing on the lessons he'd learned about sustainable success. He and Cole eventually repaired their relationship, not to the closeness of childhood, but to a respectful adult friendship. Cole had finally found his own path, separate from family expectations, and the distance actually brought them closer. When Marcello passed away at 87, surrounded by family, Julian and Mara were there. His funeral was a celebration of a life well lived, full of stories and laughter and food and love. Julian gave the eulogy, talking about the man who'd taught him that success wasn't measured in dollars, but in relationships, that the best legacy was the people you loved and who loved you in return. Marcello's restaurant stayed in the family, run by his daughter and grandchildren, and Julian and Mara made sure to visit regularly, to keep the connection alive, to honor the man who'd been more father than Julian's own. They showed Elena and Marcus the corner table where their parents had fallen in love over homemade pasta and honest conversation. On their 20th anniversary, they returned again to the cottage by the ocean. Their children were teenagers now, old enough to stay home alone, though they still arranged for Marcello's daughter to check on them. The cottage looked the same: weathered blue shutters, wrap-around porch, the sound of waves constant in the background. 20 years, Julian said, standing on the beach where he'd proposed. 2 decades of choosing you, and I'd do it all again without changing a single thing. Even the hard parts? Mara asked. Especially the hard parts, Julian said, because the hard parts taught us how to fight for each other instead of against each other, how to grow together instead of apart, how to build something that lasts. Mara thought about their journey, from that wedding, where she'd felt invisible, to this moment 2 decades later, with a life full of purpose and love and meaning. You saved me, she said softly. I saved myself, Mara corrected. But you showed me I was worth saving. You held up a mirror and made me see what you saw. Someone worthy of love, of choice, of taking up space. Julian pulled her close. Saved each other. That's what real love does. It doesn't complete you, because you're already complete. It just helps you see your own completeness more clearly. They made love that night with the windows open, ocean air filling the room, 20 years of history and intimacy between them. Bodies that had aged and changed and created life together. Love that had deepened and matured and become the foundation everything else was built on. Afterward, Mara traced the silver in Julian's dark hair, the lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling. You're still the most beautiful man I've ever seen, she said. And you're still the most beautiful woman, Julian replied, not despite the years, but because of them. Because every line and scar tells the story of a life fully lived. They talked late into the night about their children's futures, about their own dreams for the next chapter, about legacy and meaning and what mattered most. I want to write a memoir, Mara said, about feeling invisible and learning to be seen, about how love can transform not just your circumstances, but your fundamental understanding of your own worth. Do it, Julian encouraged. Tell your story. Let other invisible people know they're not alone, that transformation is possible, that they're already enough even if they don't know it yet. What about you? Mara asked. What's your dream for the next 20 years? More of this, Julian said simply. More mornings waking up next to you. More family dinners and conversations that matter. More opportunities to do good work and nurture good relationships. I don't need grand achievements anymore. I just need to keep choosing the life we've built, every single day. They returned home renewed, reconnected, ready for whatever came next. Elena was applying to music conservatories, her talent undeniable, her passion evident. Marcus was working on his first novel, a young adult story about a boy learning to navigate a world that wanted him to be harder, tougher, less feeling. Both children carried forward the lessons their parents had modeled, that authenticity mattered more than approval, that being fully yourself was the bravest thing you could do. Julian and Mara watched their children grow with pride and inevitable heartache, knowing they had to let them go, to build their own lives, to make their own mistakes and discoveries. But they'd given them the foundation, the knowledge that they were loved unconditionally, that they were enough exactly as they were, that their worth wasn't determined by achievement or appearance, but by the simple fact of their existence. On a quiet Sunday morning, Mara was in her reading nook, working on her memoir, when Julian appeared with coffee. He'd been making her coffee for over 20 years now, knew exactly how she liked it, the ritual a daily expression of love and attention. "You know what I realized?" Mara said, accepting the cup. "What?" "I spent so much of my early life trying to be invisible, trying to disappear. And now I spend my life trying to make sure no one else has to feel that way. Funny how your wounds become your purpose." "That's transformation," Julian said. "Taking your pain and turning it into something that helps others. That's the most powerful kind of healing." Mara looked at this man who'd seen her when no one else had, who'd loved her into believing in her own visibility, who'd built a life with her based on radical authenticity and unwavering commitment. "I love you," she said. "More now than I did 20 years ago, which I didn't think was possible. But love grows when you tend it." "I love you too," Julian said. "You taught me what it means to be soft and strong simultaneously, to be vulnerable without being weak, to build a life that matters instead of one that just looks impressive." They sat together in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching morning light fill their home. Outside, the world continued its chaos and noise and endless demands for attention. But inside, in this space they'd created together, there was peace. There was love. There was the profound satisfaction of being exactly where you belonged, with exactly who you were meant to be with, living exactly the life you'd chosen. Mara finished her memoir 8 months later. She called it Invisible, a love story about being seen. The book traced her journey from the invisible cousin in the terrible emerald dress to the woman who'd built a foundation helping invisible children, with her relationship with Julian as the thread connecting it all. It wasn't a fairy tale. She wrote honestly about her insecurities and struggles, about the work required to believe in your own worth, about how Julian hadn't saved her, but had reflected back what was always there. The book resonated deeply. Letters poured in from women and men who'd felt invisible their whole lives, who saw themselves in Mara's story, who felt hope that transformation was possible. She did book tours and interviews, speaking to packed rooms about vulnerability and authenticity, and the radical act of choosing to be seen. Julian supported every step, managing the home front, encouraging her to claim her voice, to take up space in the world. Elena graduated from the conservatory and began her career as a composer, creating music that dealt with complex emotions and human experiences. Her first major commission was a piece about her parents' love story, about two people finding each other across the noise of expectation and social pressure. It premiered at a prestigious concert hall, and when the final notes faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Marcus published his novel at 23, a powerful story about masculinity and emotional authenticity that became required reading in schools across the country. Both children were building their own legacies, carrying forward the values their parents had instilled while forging their own paths. As Mara and Julian entered their 50s, they found a new rhythm. The intense parenting years were behind them. Their children were launched, successful, good humans making the world better. Julian sold his hotel company to his employees, creating a cooperative ownership model that ensured the values would continue even without his direct leadership. He spent his time mentoring, teaching, serving on boards that mattered, and most importantly, being present with Mara. They traveled, not to luxury resorts, but to small towns and historic places, staying in local inns, eating at family restaurants, connecting with people and cultures. They volunteered together at the literacy centers, reading to children, training new volunteers, ensuring the foundation's work continued. They grew older together gracefully, silver hair and laugh lines, and bodies that had lived fully. They learned new things together, took art classes and cooking courses and dance lessons. They proved that marriage didn't have to become stale, that choosing each other for decades could still feel fresh if you kept showing up with curiosity and openness. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party. Elena performed a new composition. Marcus read a piece he'd written about what his parents had taught him about love. Friends and colleagues spoke about the impact Mara and Julian had made, the lives they'd touched, the example they'd set. But the most meaningful moment came when a young woman approached Mara, nervous and shy. "Excuse me," she said. "I don't know if you remember me, but I was one of the children in your literacy program 15 years ago. I was struggling in school, feeling invisible, like I didn't matter. You took time with me every week, made me feel seen. You gave me books that changed my life, and I wanted to thank you. Because I'm a teacher now, I run my own literacy program, and I try every day to see children the way you saw me." Mara's eyes filled with tears. This was legacy, not buildings with her name on them, not accolades or awards, but this, changed lives that went on to change other lives, the ripple effect of being truly seen. That night, alone in their home, Julian and Mara reflected on 3 decades of marriage, of building a life that mattered. "Do you know what the best part is?" Mara asked. "Tell me." "We're still choosing each other, 30 years in, and I still wake up every morning grateful you're beside me, still excited to tell you about my day, still finding new things to love about you." Julian kissed her forehead. "The invisibility you felt as a young woman, it was never true. You were always extraordinary. You just needed someone to hold up a mirror so you could see it yourself. And once you saw it, you changed the world." "Not the whole world," Mara protested. "Your world," Julian said. "My world. Our children's world. Every child who passed through your programs, every person who read your books. That's not nothing. That's everything. They made love that night, slow and familiar, and still passionate after 3 decades. Bodies that knew each other completely, that had created life and weathered storms and celebrated triumphs together. Love that had deepened into something so fundamental it was like breathing, essential and constant and life-sustaining. As they lay wrapped in each other afterward, Mara thought about the young woman who'd stood in that terrible emerald dress, convinced she'd never be chosen, never be enough. She wished she could go back and tell that woman what waited for her, that being invisible was temporary, that the right person would see you, truly see you, and that vision would help you see yourself, that love didn't require being perfect or beautiful or socially acceptable. It just required being authentic, vulnerable, brave enough to show up as yourself and trust that was enough. But she couldn't go back. None of us can. All we can do is move forward, carrying our wounds and our wisdom, building lives that reflect what we've learned. All we can do is choose to be seen, even when it's terrifying, even when every instinct says to hide. Because invisibility might feel safer, but visibility, true visibility, That's where life actually happens. Julian's arms tightened around her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Mara said. "Nothing. Just how grateful I am. For you, for us, for every choice that led us here." "Me too," Julian whispered. "Every single day. Me too." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in 30 years of love and commitment, and the profound peace that comes from being exactly where you belong, with exactly who you're meant to be with, living exactly the life you were brave enough to build. And somewhere, in libraries and schools and homes across the country, invisible children were reading Mara's books, learning that they mattered, that they were seen, that their invisibility was temporary, and their worth was infinite. The work continued, the love continued, the legacy continued. Because that's what happens when you transform your pain into purpose, when you let yourself be loved so fully that you learn to love yourself, when you build a life based on authenticity rather than approval. Mara had been the ugly bridesmaid no one noticed until the millionaire's brother chose her. But that wasn't really the story. The real story was that Mara chose herself. She chose vulnerability over safety, authenticity over invisibility, love over fear. Julian had seen her, yes, but more importantly, his seeing had taught her to see herself. And that made all the difference, because we're not too much, we're not too little, we're not invisible or inadequate or unworthy of love. We just haven't yet found the people whose vision is clear enough to see us truly. And sometimes, we haven't yet developed the courage to see ourselves. But love, real love, it gives us that courage. It holds up the mirror. It says, "Look, this is who you really are." Not the small, scared version you've been hiding, but the extraordinary, complex, worthy version you've always been. And maybe that's the truth we all need to learn, that we're not waiting to be chosen. We're learning to choose ourselves. And when we do, when we finally step into our own visibility, the right people will see us. Not because we've changed, but because we've finally stopped hiding. That's redemption. That's transformation. That's love. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you feel it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt this story was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue creating stories that touch the soul. Because these stories matter. Your story matters. And you, reading this right now, you matter. Whether you feel invisible or seen, worthy or inadequate, you matter. Your existence has value. Your story deserves to be told. And somewhere, someone is waiting to see you exactly as you are and recognize that you're exactly what they've been searching for. Keep showing up. Keep being brave. Keep choosing visibility over safety. Because the world needs your story. The world needs your light. The world needs you, exactly as you are.